In Genesis chapter 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good." This is what we're going to be talking about today. The seeming contradiction between God's pleasure with his creation in Genesis chapter 1 and God's displeasure with his creation in chapter 6. And we're going to continue working on self-contradictions in the Bible by William Henry Burr from 1860. We talked about this in the last video, but basically this is, as best I can tell, one of the very first Bible contradiction lists to show up. Now I'm sure there were plenty of anti-apologists that were around before then, and we know that for a fact because this is a compilation from William Henry Burr. He was a journalist, court reporter, and some other things. And these are compilations of things that he had gathered from other people as well as his own literary investigation. Last time, we did 24 and 25. And we're going to start back at the top, this time with number 1. God is satisfied and also dissatisfied with his work. Well, let's jump right into it. Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good." God seems very satisfied with his work there. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 6, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth." In some places, it says regretted. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And by made man, it means mankind. And on the earth, it means as opposed to heaven and on the whole earth. So we seem to have a disagreement here between God's two attitudes. And what we're going to try to do today is show that there is no real inconsistency here. That is to say, there is no self-inconsistency here with the rest of the Bible. And we're going to need to understand a few things first, namely God's overall plan for the universe and why he made this earth and why he made man the way he did. Last time we talked about mercy and justice, how if God says that somebody needs to die, then it's usually because he's got a justification, a very, very good justification. And it always says what his justification is, or it can always be very easily inferred, like when the Jews left Egypt and they borrowed a bunch of stuff from their neighbors with no intention to give it back. We can infer quite simply and easily that this was reparations for their years of slavery. But why do we need justice and mercy? Why didn't God, all wise and all knowing, make a world that was already perfect? And the simple answer to that is that he is. He is making a world that, in his wisdom and knowledge, will become perfect. That is to say, will produce a perfect world. But the long answer can be found in Jeremiah chapter 18. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We're going to start at verse 1. I'm reading the CSB version here because I just think it flows a little bit better when I'm speaking on video. Plus, this translation is in some places even more accurate than King James. I'm not going to go into why and when, but we'll leave it at that. Jeremiah chapter 18. "This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down at once to the potter's house. There I will reveal my word to you." Jeremiah is speaking here and quoting the Lord. Then he says, "So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working away at the wheel. But the jar that he was making from the clay became flawed in the potter's hand. So he made it into another jar, as it seemed right to him." It's really important, the verbiage here. It says became flawed in the potter's hand. In this specific case, it may not have been a mistake from the potter, but rather some sort of inclusion in the clay. Maybe it was an air pocket or a water pocket or impurity or something like that. The verse here is suggesting that it was the clay and not the potter. And as the clay was not perfect, the potter is perfecting the clay until it becomes, well, in this case, a jar, as he sees fit, as the potter sees fit. And that metaphor, that's an important detail about the metaphor that will carry on into the next paragraph. The word of the Lord came to me. This is, again, Jeremiah speaking, and now he's quoting God. House of Israel, can I not treat you as this potter treats his clay? This is the Lord's declaration, Jeremiah says, quoting God again. Just like clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. At one moment, I might announce concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will uproot it, tear it down, and destroy it. However, if that nation about which I have made the announcement turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the disaster I have planned to do to it. At another time I might announce concerning a nation that a kingdom that I will build, that is to say, I will announce of a nation or a kingdom that I will build and plant it and prosper it. However, if it does what is evil in my sight, by not listening to me, I will relent concerning the good that I have said I would do to it. So now say to the men of Judah and to the residents of Jerusalem, this is the word of the Lord. Look, I am about to bring harm to you and make plans against you. Turn now each from your evil way and correct your ways and your deeds. But the people of Israel said, oh, it's hopeless. We will continue to follow our plans, and each of us will continue to act according to the stubbornness of our own evil hearts. Now, I think that is paraphrasing here basically how the people of Israel acted in response to this declaration from the Most High God, but that's not the point. The point is that we know, based on Jeremiah chapter 18, this is how God goes about accomplishing perfection, just like a potter accomplishes perfection in his pot by molding and remolding the imperfect clay until it is perfect. So that's God's own argument for the imperfection in the world, that the imperfection is being worked out day by day. And if you are not willing to submit to the potter, then you'll be thrown out. And you'll get 1,000 chances. And even after God declares that your punishment is at hand, you still get one last chance. And that is precisely what is happening in Genesis. Oops, I lost it. Genesis chapter 6. Where it says, and the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Or in the KJV, he repented. It's not easy for God to go through what he's going through to shape us and reshape us. It's especially not easy to throw out something that you'd worked so hard on. Anybody who's ever done any kind of creative work will tell you you can work a long time on something and try over and over and over again and still fail and still ruin what you've done. In this case, however, it's not the imperfection of the potter, it's the imperfection of the material. Now, material is us, the clay. We are the clay, and unless we submit to God, he will eventually have to throw us out and start over. And that's exactly what happened with the flood of Noah. God killed all of mankind. In fact, he killed all of the animals too. He killed all the birds and every beast and every creature and every bird of the air and every creature from the face of the earth. And only a microscopic percentage of that life was saved on the ark. And of course, this is famously and uncontroversially a type and a shadow of the salvation plan that eventually came true in God's Son, Jesus Christ, that the ark was a symbol of Jesus, and the flood was a symbol of baptism and the cleansing of the world, that The waters cleaned all of the corruption that man had wrought out of the world and only left what was left of God's continuing perfect work. And so that's why these two verses are not self-contradictory. That, yes, it grieved God, but it would grieve any maker to have to do the same thing. And that was always part of the process. It was always part of the plan. Any artists, any creator, any artisan who goes to create work knows that there will be blood, sweat, and tears between him and perfection. And we get a window into God's own pains that he goes through in perfecting the human race in this verse. And so when it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, that God saw that it was very good, he was happy that he had started the creation. It's not impossible to say that God can be both happy about his creation and sad about what he's about to have to do. And it's also not hypocritical or inconsistent for him to do those things, because as we know in the book of Jeremiah and other places as well, that I've talked about in my previous videos as well, we know that the Lamb was slain before the beginning of time. And so it's not like you can argue that this flood happened in Genesis and then later it got retconned as, oh, that was all part of the plan in the book of Jeremiah. No, Jesus tells us that, the book of Revelations tells us that the Lamb was slain before the beginning of time. And it says in other places that the Lamb was slain before the beginning of time. And so it's not logically inconsistent. So you don't have to believe the truth of the Bible, but you do have to believe the logical consistency of, thus far, at least these two verses and the ones that I've addressed before it. So this is a good spot to end this one. I really appreciate everybody joining me in this video in my office. I hope that these videos have helped you and helped you in your faith, because in the end these videos are for faithful and not necessarily to convince the atheists that they're wrong, but rather to convince the Christians that the atheists are wrong, to give them a weapon in the psychological warfare that the enemy is waging on all of us every single day, that these quote-unquote inconsistencies are just lies from the devil, and that a slightly closer reading of the scriptures and an understanding of the fundamental things like mercy and justice and morality and God's plan for our life will clear all of this up. Thanks for watching, and remember, let God be true and every man be a liar.